Hello humans, welcome to The Front Line, a leadership and business podcast brought to you by Peregrine Corporate Services, an Isle of Man-based fiduciary provider. My name is Martin Hall, and thanks for listening. Thank you for joining us today. Today I'm joined by Nick from CSS Group. Nick, thanks for joining me.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Appreciate your time because we know everyone's busy at the moment. With most guests, we just start out just to get a little bit of background on yourself. So where did you grow up? Schools, schooling, etc.?
Yeah, so I grew up in the States. I was born in Boston originally. Grew up early years there in just outside New York City on Long Island. When I was about 6 or 7, I moved to Atlanta. So I did my primary, secondary school in Georgia. So elementary school, middle school for those of us that use the U.S. terms. And then I moved to Kentucky for high school. So I was there for 4 years in high school. And then after that, I went to the University of Kentucky for 4 years after that for my bachelor's degree.
And was that family that or work commitments that move your family around? Because they're quite different places, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. So my dad back then was the director of sales for a large software company that worked in the automotive industry, actually. So back then, before we had all these software aggregates and CRMs and huge inventory software systems that large manufacturing companies use, there was a need for automotive buyers, automotive dealers, and automotive manufacturers to have a large high-value inventory software solution, basically. So they sold that. They were the only one in the market. So they were quite a big company. They were listed U.S. Stock Exchange. And as the sales director for the East Coast, he'd move us to different offices every 3 or 4 years. So I think I moved every 3 years until I got to high school. So until I was about 14 or 15 years old. So we moved within Massachusetts, within New York State, and then I think we moved twice or maybe even 3 times in Georgia in different areas of the Atlanta metropolitan region.
Yeah, they get certainly a young age. That's they move big moves on because you get as a kid you're growing up with friends, and next thing you're swept and have to start that friend building process again, new school, the new person.
Absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, we didn't move inside any of the school zones, so we always run a new school zone. So the benefit, I guess, long term was that I've got friends in lots of different places. Mm-hmm. But yeah, when you're a kid and you have to change schools every 3 years, it's not the best thing. It's not your favorite thing to do, I don't think.
Yes. So you mentioned that back there you went back to, or you went on to what we call it uni to study. What did you study there?
So at university, I studied finance. So okay. I guess my degree is in business management, business administration, but I majored in finance at the university. And early on, I thought I was going to go into some sort of finance career, perhaps in Wall Street or something like that. Just so happens that my degree coincided with the crash in 2008 and 2009. So it wasn't great timing to go into any sort of financial career with large companies like Bear Stearns going out of business and the rest of them getting bought up by the major banks. Yeah. So I worked for Wells Fargo for a little while. I worked there for about 1.5 years, and I worked in investment banking, and I worked in some commercial lending. But it was quite apparent to me that wasn't going to last very long. So I didn't stay there very long. And after I left, it ended up that part of the bank ended up being subsumed into the retail side, which no one wants to really work in a bank as a teller if they went to school to be an investment banker. It's not exactly the same discipline. Yeah. So that wasn't something that I could see myself doing.
And before we maybe talk about your early career or early career after that, just when we talk to guests around who we talk about the age of 15, 16 and kind of deciding on a career, which I always think's a young age to go, oh, I want to do this for the rest of my life. You've obviously gone into finance to study finance at degree level. Was that obviously it was appealing to you, or was that's what felt natural?
Well, I think I always wanted to be in business of some sort. So at our business school, I think you could get 5 or 6 different majors. So you had your general business administration, you had finance, you had accounting, you had economics, you had marketing, and there was probably some business operations degree as well that you could major in. So I think when I was in there and looking back on it now, I did not want to be an accountant. Accounting didn't make sense to me in my brain as far as the way left side and right side tables line up and journal entries and why am I doing all this work on the piece of paper just to get an end result. So although you have to take accounting all the way up to the 300 level, so that's your third year in university, and you have to pass those pretty difficult classes, I didn't want to pursue that all the way to completion. So I switched to finance, which seemed much more creative. So what we did in school, what you learned to do in school was to trade financial derivatives. So you could take two different financial products, you could derive them down to a base level, and you could create new financial instruments. Unfortunately, that's how market crashed, is because they created mortgage securities out of people's mortgages. But that's what you learned to do at university to creative finance, whether it was institutionalized or on the exchange. And it seemed interesting to me, and I could use some creative aspect of my brain rather than just following numbers from concept to disbursement.
Yeah, no, and I can relate to you in regard, and certainly no accountant knows numbers. Things don't make sense to me either. So, just I suppose before we come on to now and the firms or the firm and the group you're within now, just looking through you, and we talked about it earlier off air around the jobs on the LinkedIn profile. I think we could probably talk for hours about the different jobs. So I picked a couple out just as headlines to hope to then just to dig in a little bit about management and communication within those jobs. So the first one was a budget officer within the US European Command. So kind of what was that role generally, and how did that,
So a little bit of background. So after I left Wells Fargo, I took the advice of my dad, a couple of my uncles, to get into government work because it was a bit more stable, a bit more secure, obviously. Very difficult to lose your job in the government unless you've committed fraud or crime. So that's good. You're not going to get laid off. You've got some security around that. So I think I was 23 or 24 years old when I applied for a government position. And I thought I was going to go work in DC, which is where the majority of these jobs are, the Pentagon or State Department or something like that. And so I was prepared to move. I was living in Miami at the time, working for Wells Fargo. I was prepared to move, although not really wanting to move to DC from Miami, bit of a different lifestyle. So when I got the job offer through to go work for the government, it said Germany on it. So I was like, Germany? Why would I want to go to Germany? This is what I thought initially, obviously. And I thought it through for some time. So basically the whole package was to go off to Stuttgart, Germany. The government would pay for your move, pay for your expenses while you're there, pay for your living situation. I was 22 or 23 at the time, obviously pay you a salary. You get to do all of these great things. So I packed up my stuff and I moved to Germany about 6 months later. So I think that was February of 2009, give or take. And I left Miami. It's 30 degrees still in Miami when I left, Celsius. And I got to Germany. It's about 0, and it's it's a foot of snow on the ground. And not very good at the time. Not very good. I did not study. I studied the Spanish and Italian at university and at high school before that. Did not study German. Luckily, as we were working on a U.S. military base, all Americans working there, which was great, but didn't help you once you left the base to go home for the day and to go buy things. Obviously, to go to the food shop, to deal with your landlord, and all these other things. So you had to learn the language at least to a respectable or maybe even basic level pretty quickly. So at first I was like, man, this is a mistake. I could be at the beach this week. Instead I'm here in the freezing snow. I'm dealing with, a completely brand new life now. I didn't bring any friends with me, wasn't married at the time, not any of those things. So I stayed there for a few years initially, did a whole bunch of cool things, including I worked with NATO for a while in the Partnership for Peace program, which is the countries that aren't yet signed up formally to NATO. We do military exercises with them. We do military aid. We do civil response. We do all kinds of things as the U.S. military to help them get up to whatever the NATO standard is, which is a very long document of about 600 pages, which I can't really go into full detail. And you can imagine there's things you have to do to demonstrate your military is able to interoperate with the U.S. military and the rest of our partners in NATO. So we would go out to places like Ukraine and Moldova and areas in Eastern Europe to do military exercises with these new partners that wanted to join into NATO. So this is when I was quite young. Again, 23, 24, going to all these interesting places that I probably couldn't even spell a few years ago. Maybe kind of knew where they were if I threw a dart in the map, but didn't really have any understanding of the language. So that's good.
I was going to say, well, maybe not going into specifics, but when you talk about military exercise, what is that? What kind of just general kind of thing is that? Just to, again,
right.
I wouldn't know just some context to what that means.
Yeah. So for instance, let's say we were going into Ukraine. So what we would do there is that we would have a military naval exercise with the Ukrainians and with several partners that would also bring their naval ships in. So basically, what you would do is you would exercise, practice, percept that there is an attack or there's some type of terrorist attack or military attack from a third party. I mean, you can imagine what countries they're trying to protect against in Ukraine. Or you could do a Crimean exercise of an invasion from a rebel force. So you build up a scenario, you build up the storylines around the scenario. You would then get everyone together, get them on the ropes, get them into the positions, and then you'd run a 2, 3, 5, or 7 day scenario around what that looked like, play it out in real time, introduce specific concepts and storylines and events that are going to happen based on military theory or from operations that happened in the past or from exercises that happened in the past. And then you'd see how the militaries would communicate, interoperate, defend, attack, take on fire, things like that. And then you would, at the end of it, you would obviously have an entire outbrief and lessons learned, and that would help you potentially do something similar in the future at a better scale.
Yeah, and imagine things like in those scenarios you're then, and I guess a room full of people and communicating that you're sort of ultimately surrounded by a lot of leaders and picking up immense amount of information, helpful information on and different skills around leadership.
Absolutely. I mean, what you have, generally you have an operations room, and inside the operations room you have 7, 8, or 10 major functions that go from logistics to operations to communications to the gambit of what the military puts into its 8 or 9 silos that they have out there. So each of those silos, let's say each of those major functional areas, is headed by, a colonel, lieutenant colonel, perhaps a major, 20 years of military experience, leading and fighting in different parts of the world and different types of organizations. So you have very interesting spread of military leadership styles, as well as a very close-up understanding of what it looks like when leadership turns into under fire leadership, not just in the classroom or something like that.
Yeah, so that's where I guess where there's these external stress factors that they try and put in the situation to see make or break, I guess, as part of that process.
Absolutely. I mean, and while they are in charge of their functional areas and design areas, they're also being graded. I mean, there's a independent audit function that happens inside of that operations center for the betterment of the group. Then takes into account how things are being achieved, what's being achieved, what's not being achieved, what's failed in the course of the test, and then how we can get better in the future. So it's hard to tell a 20-year Army colonel what he should or shouldn't do. He knows it. He knows it intrinsically. He's trained his whole life to do a specific set of tasks underneath an operation. However, there are feedback methods that you can give them in case that there's a style that maybe be able could be done better, really.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So again, that you're also learning about a feedback process. Again, people I suppose in senior or management roles where they've got to, you tell staff off, or staff need dealing different and need constructive feedback and not criticism. And I guess they're again all traits that you learn as part of that of the way different personalities.
If nothing else, you may learn that certain people are better in certain situations and how to move the pieces around the puzzle a bit more, move the chess pieces around to get the best out of everyone. I think that's more to the point of, rather than a pass or fail grade, it's really how can we best utilize that talent or that style in that situation at that time that's needed.
And was you, a fairly young age, and you talk about older generals, etc. Were you intimidated by that environment initially when you went into it, or was that something you thrived in?
Yeah, at first I was just like, I have no idea what's going on. There's all this stuff happening. There's all kinds of screens on, and I'm not quite sure what all this means. It's not like a movie. I mean, it's colors and numbers and moving pieces that don't actually have a clear description of what they are. So certainly, at first it was quite intimidating and really just the learning curve is quite steep. So it takes you time being in those situations to learn all of that, and then finally you can get an understanding of what all that means. Because there's not really any courses that tell you about this. I went to military operations school. I went to some I guess basic theory around how you can achieve and move along operations, but the details and the specific nomenclature that's utilized when it actually happens is nothing but what you learned in how to school.
Yeah. Okay. And that to go back to the question at the outset, that was the when we talked about different jobs previously, that was the US European Command.
Right. Yeah. So eventually I went down that track, and I got into what I guess I started with was finance. I ended up getting into finance in the military at some point. I went through training, practice, exercise, operations, which wasn't really finance related. It was more partnerships and program management and operations and logistics. And logistics was a big part of my background up to that point. And then when I got into the budget part of it, it was the finance piece. So now we're talking about looking at $150, $200 million budgets that are appropriated to the commands, utilized for a whole number of things. So when you're the budget officer, or you're the budget office at one of these major commands, so these commands, just for a bit of background, are 4-star commands. So within the U.S. military, we've got levels of commands: 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star. That designates the general that's in charge of these actual commands, or admiral if there's a Navy element to it. So 4-star command is the highest command that you can serve at. There is 8 unified commands across the globe that control certain elements of a regional basis. The European Command is in charge of defense and operations throughout all of Europe and Israel, and a bit into the Levant. So anything that happens in that space that the U.S. military should be involved in, might be involved in, or is involved in, happens and flows up to that command at the very top level. So you got the tactical level. This stuff's happening right now. Operational level. Okay, this stuff will happen sooner or in the future. Let's build an operational plan around it. And you've got the strategic level, which is the 4-star level, which says, okay, we need to look at this from almost a CEO perspective. How are we going to manage this enterprise? And everything that happens in the lower levels all the way up to us needs to be thought through, planned for, created around from an operational basis, and then given strategic guidance from the top down. So that's a long way of saying that everything that happened comes up the chimneys to the top where we were sitting at the time. So all the money that controls all that stuff that below that pyramid top basically is sitting up there at the top at European Command, and for similar commands around the globe. So you've got the big budget there, let's say, or control of the big budgets that sit in your subsequent commands down the chain, basically. So if you take the whole thing, it's probably billions. But if you just look at the very top, it's in the hundreds of millions. And so there you decide, where are we going to spend this money? What are we going to spend it on? What's worthwhile? What's not worthwhile? And a lot of very important decisions are made around, hey, should we invest in country X, Y, or Z? Should we move our troops to here or there to do specific exercises? Or big things like, should we build a anti-rocket capability in Israel, which is called the Iron Dome, which we built while I was there. So things like that are very, very much present in the news and maybe perhaps in some of our lives happen at that very top level.
Yeah. Okay. So I suppose, and again, I guess applying that to just, a small to medium-sized firm, that same philosophy of, the budget at the top, the board deciding where strategically building the business to obviously reach its goals and then filtering down that budget, whatever that might be, down through the business.
Yeah, I think the principles and lessons are the same. It doesn't matter. It does matter if it's a kinetic, present physical threat. Obviously, if rockets are coming in, you want to stop them. Okay, what does it cost to do that? That's the much more black and white, and unfortunately, the less of the humanitarian approach. How we build that and what does it cost to do it. But from a business perspective, you've got to make those decisions every single day. From a strategic level, if you're a director of your business, you need to think about not only what to spend your money on now, how far your budgets will go now, but what does it look like down the road in 3 to 5 years, and what's the forecast that you might be bringing in, and what parts of the industry that you currently operate in or the parallel industries or parallel markets do you want to get into, and how does that affect your overall position? I mean, you can swap out places and armies for programs and projects if you want.
Yeah. Okay. And one of the other jobs I picked up from like I say, I could spend hours chatting about it, but was working with the US Department of Defense, a special program. Whereabouts was that, and what was entailed there?
So after I finished my European tour of about 6 years, came back to the States, ended up working in Tampa, Florida at McDill Air Force Base. And that's where we've got two, again, the reason I told you about those 4-star commands is because I'm going to go into it a bit more. So in Tampa, Florida, you've got a military base sitting in the middle of Tampa Bay on the end of a peninsula called McDill. There's a relatively large air base there for air wing refueling, but there's also 2 major commands that sit on that base as well. One central command, so that's a 4-star command that controls all the operations in the Middle East. So from Tampa, theoretically, we fight the war in Afghanistan and Iraq,
right. Wow.
which is a long way away from the actual fight, obviously. So the ability to use satellite communications and technology are paramount in the military world these days, because there is a operations center, obviously, that sits out there downrange, a couple of them. There's also a large one that sits in Tampa, Florida, that controls what happens out there to a certain extent, with obviously the idea of time, tyranny, distance, time, and space being applied, that you can make your own decisions downrange at the tactical level. But again, from here, from the 4-star command level, we're going to make strategic decisions around what we want to do out in that military fight, whether it's in Iraq, Afghanistan, or the new fights that have emerged in the last couple of years in Syria and in other places. So they're doing all that and working very similar hours to what people are working downrange, trying to stay on time with them to make sure they can make decisions effectively. So that sits on one part of the base. Other part of the base is where we have another 4-star command called U.S. Special Operations Command, SOCOM for short. That command, we are, again, a 4-star level, 4-star general, Marine, or Navy SEAL would control that type of base. We're controlling the training, distribution of talent, and operations of all the special operations forces around the world, globally. Mm-hmm. So in the UK, I think there's some, the special operations force can be counted in the high 100s or low thousands, let's say. That's paras, that's your boat people, that's your air guys, all together. So probably let's call it in the low thousands, let's say that. In the US military, we're talking about tens of thousands of special operators. So all the way, anything from a ranger all the way up to a SEAL, basically. And then you got the 4 forces around that. You've got the special operators in the Marines, special operators in the Navy, special operators in the Army, and special operators in the Air Force, and their own elements that sit around that. So this command is jointly set up. So you've got all the elements of the military sitting together, whether you have a green jacket on, a blue jacket on, whatever it is, you're sitting together and you're making decisions around those 4 major elements and that large amount of tens of thousands of operators that achieve things on behalf of the U.S. military. So saying all that, inside that larger apparatus and that larger idea of around training and things like that, there's special programs that more sensitive and classified. But what we do in there, what we're trying to do in there basically is create effects on the battlefield across the world. So we're running programs that our guys are going to do that are creating positive effects around the world through whatever means that we have and our partners' means in those spaces. So huge logistics program, huge budget around it, huge amount of moving parts to get our 25 or 30 guys halfway around the world, huge amounts of finance, huge amounts of money moving, all kinds of things that come together into this large program that has congressional oversight. So twice a year, we have to go up to Congress and say, hey, we're spending X, Y, and Z in this program. Please don't take it away from us. We need more. Yeah. And justify all of our operations underneath that and what we're doing in each of those operations, because the program manages something like 21 operations in 16 different countries in the world. So all of that is sat under an umbrella and a special oversight committee that has access to all the material.
I mean, it kind of blows my mind. The amount, communication across that and then down that chain must be a massive challenge. And I go back to, it kind of reminds me of one of the guys I listen to quite a bit, who is a guy called Jacko Willink, who's a former Navy SEAL and does a lot of leadership stuff now. And he talked about when he was in Afghanistan, Iraq, he had to they had to train the locals. Mm-hmm. When they were first told to do that from command, they were like, they're basically useless. They're going to put us and our team at risk because we're going to have to take them out to fight with us. But the strategic approach of the hierarchy, let's say, back in the States was, we're never going to leave this country unless you train the locals to look after themselves. So you're going to have to put yourself at risk. But that message needs to be clear from the very top down of the rationale for those decisions, because you're ultimately putting men on the ground at risk. But they need to understand, if you don't take that risk now, well, you're going to be here forever. So you need to take that risk. And that communication must be certainly difficult at times, especially being millions of miles away, or many miles away.
I mean, one of the things you have, cultural differences can't really be overstated in this sense. So if you talk about training militaries in Iraq and Afghanistan, but predominantly Iraq and other countries where it is not quite as common for high-grade military officers to do physical labor or physical activity or physical exercise. And all of our guys have to exercise every single day for, from 6 a.m. when the horn blows till first breakfast. So that entire cultural difference took quite a while. I mean, there's some interesting YouTube clips out there of us training the Iraqi military and some of the Iraqi surrogates, and they're just doing jumping jacks, and they're not able to do jumping jacks. Right. So if you can't do jumping jacks, how are you going to move fire and position under, in battle? So we need to start basics. And there's always a lot of questions around advanced military tactics, where they should be taught to downrange partners, and depending on what partners they were, we need to figure out how they can actually communicate and move around as a unit first before we can start teaching them advanced tactics around room clearing. Yeah. So again, so kind of enforcing what you're saying there's a communications gap. Could be, hey, in DC, we're saying these guys need to know advanced military tactics so they can be our special operations surrogates, and they can move fire capture or perhaps do other things to targets that we give them. Okay, that's fine. They need to figure out how to walk from, A to B.
And keep your head down. Yeah. Interesting. So again, I'm sure we could dig in a lot more, but maybe looking at present day, you're within the CSS Group, so maybe a bit of background on what they do, your role within that.
Absolutely. So CSS as a group has a couple of different brands inside of it. So as a group, we kind of started as 4 directors. We all were working for professional service firms in the past. I was a strategy consultant. One of the directors was a defense consultant. One of the directors was a professional consultant inside of a large aggregator. And then we had another professional consultant join us. We all had kind of worked for professional services at a pretty high level, had a good client base. However, we were working for somebody else. And it wasn't as fulfilling, I suppose, from a certainly psychological level. So we all knew each other very well, had a long history together, worked together in numerous places, set up right away, had a number of our clients sign on with us right away. And that was in the UK to start with, and in Europe. And that was primarily focused on corporate security, inside businesses, inside their apparatus, inside their infrastructure. And then we focused on financial services, professional service firms, law firms, accountants, in that sense. We have a large charity client that's a military charity in the UK, and then we've got a whole number of other kind of clients that kind of fit inside there. But those are kind of the major silos that we work in. And our methodology and what we were looking at was, hey, we should go into businesses. We should figure out what their real struggles are and what their real questions are, and what can we do to help them, and not add in all of kind of what we saw as a problem in the market, which was technical jargon and very, very unclear pricing structures, and very difficult to understand unless you are a IT person by nature, or you have an IT background. Some of the things that that these companies were trying to do to help you, and this is coming from the States and from the UK and from Europe, and getting a kind of a flavor of all these things. All of us have worked in big companies in all 3 of those places, and obviously the Defense Department being the biggest company in the world, we have a huge base of suppliers that feed into that major structure. So that's where we got our start. That was about 2.5 years ago that we decided to focus on, getting the UK. I think one of the things that we saw was we worked out in the US, me being American obviously, but a few of us have worked out in the US for major companies, saw the technology that was coming out of Silicon Valley for information security, saw it being utilized in listed companies in the US, really, really large companies in the tens of billions in turnover. Okay, so what do they do in the UK? Let's look at the top market in the UK and see if they're utilizing any of the same suppliers or looking into it. No, they're not. Okay, so let's figure out if we can kind of bring some of that technology over to the UK, build up that base of knowledge, and see, where they are in the timeline to get into that point, because it's very agnostic for someone who's trying to break into any of these companies from a security perspective, whether you are, in California, in Atlanta, in New York City, or in London. It doesn't matter to them. So you shouldn't perceive yourself as being a tribal country only specific company, because obviously a lot of the companies in the UK are listed. Listed companies are generally outside of just the general UK area.
And when you're looking at, I suppose, attack from the outside, again, you typically, I guess, ultimately trying to protect data, but also, I guess, IP, things like that.
Absolutely.
Money,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it really depends on the client, what's valuable to them. But so if you're a financial services company, if you're a trust, let's say, like you might find quite often on the Isle of Man, if you're a fiduciary, money is important. Money flows through your company to do things for whatever companies you manage or whoever you direct in that sense. So there's an opportunity there for some of that money to not end up where it should be if you don't have a security perspective or infrastructure built up very well. That's something very simple and easy for us to understand. The most basic example is someone sends you an email, it's an invoice, that invoice has bank details that are different than the bank details that you used to pay. You pay that invoice, that money's gone. That's a very simple little bit of phishing or a little bit of security attack that people do all the time. I get emails sometimes that have that information on it that gets kind of cut off by our security procedures. But quite often in trust and in fiduciaries, you get these type of emails and you need to trace that back to the source about where that email came from and figure out, is this a security problem or not? Yeah. That's a very basic example. Larger companies, manufacturing, large service companies have lots and lots of IP that sit inside them, processes and procedures that they utilize for their clients that are worth, untold amount of money. They don't want that getting out there because the competition could take it and utilize it for themselves. Or it's out, there's some knowledge in there that shouldn't be shared with the public. Or there is customer data in there, like you said before, millions and millions of lines of customer data that can be sold out to any person that's acting out in the black market, in the dark web, in the gray web. And once that happens, not only do you put your clients at risk, but you put yourself in a very precarious financial position, because you've got regulators that look at that and look to penalize you for not having security around your company and around your client's data.
Certainly in the offshore arena where there's been hacks and data stolen. Yeah,
absolutely.
They're followed by what? Yeah, like you say, risk to their business, risk to their clients, and then risk from the regulator, which is financial as well. Yeah,
I used to travel a lot before this quarantine happened. I used to travel every week or every 2 weeks. So I'm a member of Marriott hotels. I've got BA, I've got Delta, I've got all the major carriers on my email list. Well, unfortunately, about once a month, I get an email from a major carrier, a major hotel that says, "Oh, sorry, your data seems to have been stolen. We're not really sure what we're going to do about it. So just so you know, we want to let you know that your data has been stolen. We don't know where it is. It's gone. You might want to change your credit card numbers. You might want to change your address. You might want to update that. So we'll just let you know what happens in the future." That's not the response that you're supposed to be putting out there to the public. That's not helpful for anybody. That just gives a sense of confusion and a sense of, great, so do I need to change my credit card numbers? Do I need to get new credit cards? You really just don't know what they're trying to tell you because they don't actually know what's been stolen. And those are large companies. BA and Marriott, it happened to. Relatively big companies in the world. They have security teams embedded inside of their organization. They pay people lots of money to know this information, and they just don't know. And that's really a problem, unfortunately, that we're trying to solve.
So two questions out of that. The first one that springs to, or I remember first, is that I assume you work with medium, small, whatever. You've got you kind of flex to what the client, the client size and the client needs. And then I suppose the follow-up part was you mentioned there about, I look at any firm, they tend to have an IT infrastructure, whether it's in-house or they outsource it. And do you sometimes find that they feel maybe you're coming to step on their toes if you kind of coming in with just looking at the security in place? Because I guess you speak to any third-party provider who's providing IT services, they'll say you're fine. And I'm sure they're not always the case. So do you find that a difficult subject at times?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first of all, yes. So while we do service listed companies and FTSE and things of that size, we have focused on the SME market for the sole purpose that the information is not out there. And we didn't leave corporate jobs to go work for corporate overlords. That's from our perspective, that's not what we wanted to do. Now, I'm not saying every large company is a corporate overlord, but there's a psychology to what we've decided to do here to start our own business. And it was, hey, we want to help out the clients that we know in the large and corporate side of the world. When I say corporate, it's the U.S. term for large businesses. We want to help them out. We have colleagues, friends, whatever, inside those businesses that we want to help out. But our business model is not around pitching to major corporations for streams of work. It's about helping out SMEs, because the information is not really well filtered down from the top, from the large corporations down into the SME market. Unfortunately, a lot of the products and platforms and solutions are pricing out SMEs. They can't afford to invest £10,000 a month into their security because they have to pay their staff. And that perfectly makes sense to anybody who doesn't work for a huge corporation, who deals with huge budgets, who sees 10,000 as, instead of, your staff's wages, sees it just as the travel budget for John for the next couple of weeks. So there's a complete difference in how people look at these amounts of money and how the support is looked at. So we're able to wholly focus on the SME market because, again, we did this, leaving our corporate jobs, set up this business to educate and to help and support businesses just like us who need that help. And we didn't do it to make huge profits in the corporate life. So that answers the first question. Second question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
That is a very good question. We do have sometimes to deal with outsourced IT who like to present themselves as security experts. And unfortunately, that's just not the same discipline or the same case. So, as a business owner myself, I can understand I've got an IT solution, and that I had outsourced IT to handle the IT solution. And probably IT and information security sounds similar. So maybe IT handles information security from a purely basic level. I'm sure that my IT guys they got a firewall and they've got some virus stuff in there to keep things from getting into my network. Great, I'm happy with that. It's sorted out. Well, it depends on what your business does and your business model and how you communicate and a whole number of other factors, whether or not you're sorted out or not. So when we bring in solutions, when we audit companies, when we look at their outsourced IT providers, there certainly is some element of checking homework and whether or not that IT provider wants their homework checked. And wants to receive a grade for their homework predominantly. So they don't always want to receive a grade, much less have their homework checked by security professionals. And very often we've seen them present themselves as security professionals and talk about very basic solutions that have been out in the market for as long as we've had iPhones. And that's fine. And that might be good enough for basic business processes. But there's a whole other level of security solutions and platforms that can be brought in if the business needs it. Not every business needs it. That unfortunately is outside of their expertise, and it's outside the expertise in the way that I don't know how to be a professional marketing executive because I didn't study marketing after my second year of university. So I'm not going to present myself as a marketing executive. Although I know business, I have degrees in business and in finance, doesn't necessarily mean that I should go out there and say, hire me for marketing executive. I'm going to take your product to the moon and back. That's not something that I should say. And so in a similar vein, not every person who has an IT background should say they're an information security professional. It's just a completely different discipline. And the fact that you have to go to school to learn these things or have experience in these things over a certain amount of time to be able to professionally consult in that way and present yourself in that way. Not every outsourced IT company has these issues, but certainly we've run into it in the past. And there's a whole element of education around that we try and help our clients with as gently as possible, because we understand that there's a relationship there, and that relationship doesn't need to be a relationship of we know better than you know. That's not the relationship we're trying to establish. It's just a relationship that says there's different disciplines in this world, different disciplines in information, whether it's technology or security. We just want to make sure that we stay inside the lanes that we have. I'll cross over where we need to, but also provide the best advice we can to our clients and do it at a basis that is able for them to translate and understand what we're trying to tell them.
You can ultimately complement the services that are already there on.
Exactly. We don't come into a business and we're like, hey, we're going to give you computers, we're going to give you an information solution, we're going to do all this outsourced IT for you. That's not something we want to do. That's not what our expertise is in, or the disciplines that we studied in school or have expertise in from life. So it is a complementary service from our perspective, and it's as complementary as it can be, and it doesn't cross over into their realm of outsourced IT provision unless it is kind of changing some things on networks that allow us to bring in the solution, which is very superficial change anyways.
So to go back to, we talked earlier about obviously the leadership, maybe it's a difficult question to answer, but if our listeners, you had one piece of or tip or advice in regard to just leadership in general, I appreciate we're stepping back a little bit here, and put through that military experience and seeing that, what would that tip be?
I always thought that listening was the best part about being a leader. And I think that's something that's always trampled on all the time in leadership training, management training. They want you to be assertive. They want you to get out there and lead from the front, especially a lot of the military disciplines. And initially, in the early years of learning military leadership from the schooling perspective, that's what they're trying to tell you is assertive, leading from the front, setting an example, all those great terms that we hear all the time, obviously, in popular cinema, things like that. Now, later on, they talk about, okay, you've done that. Now let's talk about how you can actually help the people that are working for you help themselves. And one of those ways is to be a great listener. And being a great listener is really just trying to understand the perspective and empathize with what your staff or the people who serve under you are trying to achieve, what their motivations are, what makes them tick, what can you do to support them to make everyone in the unit or in the team or in the company's life better. And that's really what I try to do, and what I learned was the best method for me. It wasn't standing up on my desk and saying, right, we're going to do this, follow me, I'm going to do it first, you're going to do it after me. I'm setting the example. That might work for some people, obviously, and certainly there's probably a time and a place to do that. If the building's on fire, that's what I'm going to do. We're going out that exit. I'm making that decision. But if it's normal business operations, or you're in a project team together, or you're developing a program, or you're building a product, or any of these things that you would do in business, I mean, it's really important to get all the ideas out there and get the brainstorming done and figure out. Certainly, people are going to have better ideas than me, and we hire people to be smarter than us. That's the whole point of having businesses, is not to hire people that you don't think can contribute, but just do some stuff. We'll do this, you do that. It's hire people that can contribute, that can really, really influence the product design process, or the operational process, or the delivery process for consultants, and let them take off with something once you give them the basis from which they can start to be creative. And as they go along the route, if they need to, you've got course correction, you've got steering, you've got things that you can influence along the way and provide that kind of management perspective. But you allow people to be empowered. You allow them to have their own thing, do their own thing, and they're gonna achieve great things, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, you mentioned empowerment there. That was kind of the word going through my head. Was it's that empowerment. So a little bit more maybe about yourself. I mean, outside of work, how do you relax?
So I played sports most of my life. I played 3 sports all the way up through high school, and then played baseball at university. So I was a big team sports guy, if you want to call it that, from a very general perspective. I like playing team sports. I like playing pickup basketball, playing softball, because when you get older in the U.S., you can't play baseball anymore, so you have to play softball, which is slow pitch instead of fast pitch. That's just the whole thing about getting old, which I'm not there yet, but I can see myself getting to that point where it's just drinking a beer and playing softball, unfortunately, is my team sports outing in the future. But that's what I generally do. We don't have that as much. I'm here in France. We don't have that as much over here. We've got football, obviously, soccer for the U.S. people. So I do play that once in a while as a team sport, but mostly it's more limited to individual sports. So now I do a lot of skiing and water sports as well when I'm back in the States. My family lives on a lake outside of Atlanta, so we do skiing and wakeboarding and things like that. Nice. And then just individual things like golf. I was playing golf yesterday. It was raining terribly here, but it was the first day that we could actually get out of quarantine. Yeah. So even though it was raining, and it was kind of like being in Scotland yesterday, even though I'm in the southwest France, still out there for 18, and soaked. The car is soaked. It's just it's fine though. It's worth being out there to get outside of general, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for our listeners, in regard to I suppose reading and books, are you any recommendations, whether that be just books you read for relaxation or books you read for your kind of own knowledge and self-development?
Yeah, I mean, I like history, so I do read a lot of history books, and certainly an element of kind of where I live and where I've traveled and what I've done is made me even more interested in history of Europe as opposed to the history of the U.S., which I've learned a lot in school and university and things like that. So I do read a lot of history books. I read The Guns of August recently, which is a book about World War I, the preceding lead up to World War I, and the first few months of action in August of that time. And it paints a pretty great picture around the political motivations of people leading up into that time and the different monarchies that were controlling around that time. At least for history people, was quite interesting. Interesting for me. And then I read some stuff on current politics. I read about geography. And from a motivational perspective, I do like biographies. I mean, I read Obama's biography last year. I'm halfway through Clinton's biography. It's 800 pages. So just trying to find the time to read that in my life is interesting. But for me, a big part about the biographies that I read are from the motivational books that I read is the beginning, learning how the origins of it happened. That's interesting to me to figure out how they got to that point to where they were. So if it's a biography on a president, let's say that we're talking about leadership and management and those great things, that's fine. I understand the style, and I'm happy to read that. So really the first quarter of the book is around how they got the motivations to become that sort of person. And so that's probably the most interesting part of the books for me. And unfortunately, that leads me to have 6 or 7 books always open and none of them having been complete. So I'm probably going to get better at that. But I think, we're going to be in quarantine for another 3 or 4 weeks. Yeah. So I've got time to finish some of these books. Yeah.
Yeah. And if people want to reach out to you, Nick, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn or email me directly, which I can post my email at some point. Or you can reach us on Twitter or on Facebook. We've got a number of different platforms that you can reach us on. That if you have questions about security, questions about business, questions about, one of the things we've been talking about in the last 3 or 4 weeks is agile working. Agile working is a nice way of saying working remotely from home, and we're consulting with businesses on how to effectively communicate and operate and look at their financial situation or look at the security or any of those things from where they are currently, all working from the comforts of their own home until we, if we're all getting back together at some point in our offices, that bridge to that point. But I think, there's a strong argument to say that what's happened now in the last 2 months, 3 months in some parts of the world, is going to change the workers' psychology for the future. And they're going to stand up and they're going to say, well, I do like the office. I do like the camaraderie that I feel when I'm in the office. I do like the getting up every day and going to work, that psychological idea of having a routine. I mean, that's great for people. But also, I think people have started to understand, if they didn't before, that there is an opportunity for them to be a bit more flexible in their working arrangement, a bit more flexible in the way that they interact with their office, with their job. And I think that's going to be important to people going forward. Certainly, has been for a lot of people that we've talked to, and we've held webinars around this and answered questions around this. And, it's usually 2 ways. Management are asking us, how do we best communicate with staff? How do we keep staff happy? How do we empower our staff? How do we work in a collaborative fashion online using whatever platform that we use, whether it's Microsoft platform or Zoom platform or whatever they utilize? And then from the staff, who are managers, are asking us, how do I best communicate with my boss, with my team? How do I manage my time effectively? How do I manage my workload effectively? How do I measure outputs? How can I have my boss measure my outputs? Because it used to be measurement of outputs is like, I saw you at 9 a.m. and I saw you at 5 p.m. and you were here between that time. So your output was this many hours of work per day. Not saying all businesses are set like that, but certainly there's an idea around that that's kind of ever present in the back of the mind that, okay, well, Jack was here all day, so he's put in a full day of work, so, there's no issues. That's going to change. So let's get a little bit smart in how we can measure people's outputs. we can introduce the concept of KPIs around workers' outputs, and whether it's time basis, output basis, or some hybrid of the two. There's ways to do that, which people probably didn't have time to think about in the past, which is fine because everyone's busy, and that's a term that's thrown around a lot, obviously, but it is true, especially people who are running businesses, who are doing 1,000 different things, who are just hoping that the people who work for them or that they're managing are doing what they're supposed to do, and then they get together at certain points in the calendar and they catch up to make sure everyone achieved what they're supposed to achieve. Well, there's no reason to not make that an ongoing basis or a measurement basis, and that, so we've had that discussion.
Like you say, the whole dynamics has changed, and those whole factors of people working remotely was just 6-8 weeks ago. Businesses, I'm sure many businesses never even thought about it, and now it's happened, and will probably continue to happen. That those things you mentioned there are built into that. In regards to people reaching out, we'll obviously stick some notes in our footer as well, so we'll add some links. So if you want to reach out to Nick, please, obviously he says that, please do so. So appreciate you coming on. I think we could natter for a lot longer, and I suspect we chatted beforehand. We will at some other occasion as well, but I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on today.
All right, thanks very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening, everyone.